All right, so Camille Thurman, it is good to see you and good to have you on. How are you doing?
I'm good. It's good to see you too. It's been a while.
And where are you coming to us from with that fantastic background?
I'm coming from San Francisco, California.
San Francisco.
hmm
What brought you out there?
Family.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And that's an impressive record collection right there. We got a little bit of everything, or is it mostly jazz?
I haven't actually had a chance to check it out yet. I'm hoping to do that tonight, but probably mostly jazz because my friend he's a avid jazz lover, listener, and player.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when was the last time you were in New York during all this craziness?
Last week.
You were supposed to have a show, right?
Yeah, we were supposed to have a show 2 weeks ago, and the day before, the governor of New York passed a law banning ticketed sale events and the advertisement of them. So the concert got nixed.
Did he say how long that's for? Because I know they just opened gyms.
Nobody knows. And the sad thing, it was an outdoor concert too. So of course we were following all the regulations of COVID and social distancing, and he banned all ticketed events and bars and restaurants, outdoor places. So you could play music if it's how can I say it, not paid ticketed event if you
So
choose to.
like you can busk in the park, but
Yeah,
as the moment you charge a fee to watch that performance, then that's not okay.
exactly.
Well, that makes it extra fun to be a musician right now on top of everything else.
No, it's very hard for musicians because the one thing that we love to do, which is perform and comfort and heal and bring great music and vibes to people, that's the one thing we can't do right now.
I
Unfortunately.
saw, was it, I mean, you'll have to forgive me, time sort of all blends together during all of this, but was
Yeah.
there a virtual concert with Jazz at Lincoln Center where you were all sort of playing your parts remotely?
Yes, we've done a few of those where each of us were playing from home with our cell phone and our little mic, and we had a great sound engineer that put all 14, 15 parts together, synced them up, and voila, we got a video, audio mixed, and everything sounding like we're in the same room.
So that wasn't live, right?
Now,
Okay, I was gonna say if that's, I don't know how you would deal with the lag if you're trying to do that live.
no, I think people are still trying to work on some software out there to make that happen. I heard there's quite a few programs that are pretty good, but we're still, having to deal with latency, which for musicians, you don't want to deal with that. It gets kind of frustrating if you're trying to play live together via stream.
Yeah, there's a couple of rehearsal programs that people are starting to use a lot more now during all this, but I'd be curious to know what the latency is when you're talking about that many instruments too.
Yeah, I'd be curious too. That's a lot of instruments to be streaming at once and information to be processing and throwing back on the other end for people to hear. It's kind of tricky.
So let's sort of take a step further back and talk about you and your career and music. What got you started wanting to be a musician? When we're talking about Little Camille, what got you into that?
Well, what got Baby Camille into music was honestly the first time I saw a blue violin. It was Noel Pointer. I went to a concert when I was about 4 years old, and I was studying. I just started studying the violin, and my mother took me, and I saw a shiny blue violin, and I was like, I want a violin like that. So ever since then, I was committed to studying music. Of course, I didn't stay with the violin, as you can see, but it wasn't until I got into middle school that I learned the flute, and then my curiosity kind of had me stumble into learning the other woodwinds, the alto saxophone. I thought it was a mouthpiece for a clarinet, and my band teacher, he told me it was a saxophone mouthpiece. And he told me that day, hey, if you play saxophone and flute and clarinet, you can play on Broadway, you can play all the woodwinds because they're all similar. And that just opened up my imagination. And after that, I was like, I want to play everything. So I started, of course, playing the tenor saxophone not too long after, still playing the flute and clarinet, and the singing didn't come until much later. I was always doing it since I was a young kid. young child. But being a little lady and playing an instrument, particularly the saxophone, sometimes it can be kind of it could be kind of scary, I guess, if you're shy. And for me, because I was physically, petite, people would always look at me and my instrument and question if I could play that, or if I was hanging out with the guys in the band, they would always be like, "Oh, you're the singer in a band." And I knew I was a singer, but I also knew I was a horn player, and I always wanted to put my feet flat on the ground and be like, "No, I am a horn player." So I kept that a secret all the way up until college. And it wasn't until I met my mentors, Antoine Roney, Michael Carbone, and Mimi Jones, and Tia Fuller, when they literally sat me down and looked me in the eye and said, "Look, you have a rare ability to sing very well and to play very well. You should do both." And that's what I've been doing ever since.
And you went to an art specific high school also, right?
Yeah, I went to LaGuardia High School, which is also known as the Fame High School, where you got dancers and artists in the hallway playing music and painting and dancing and singing. It's not really like that, but there was a couple of moments where it kind of got close.
So it wasn't High School Musical in real life?
Definitely not High School Musical.
I've never actually seen it. I just know that it exists to make the reference.
Yeah, it was a great program. We got to see so many great musicians as guest artists and also as guest clinicians. First time I met Wynton Marsalis was literally in my first period jazz class, walking in, and he was there giving us a master class. So we had all kinds of artists coming in.
So you take a little bit of a different track next and where you go to college. Can you talk a little bit about that process and decision?
Sure. Well, I went to performing arts high school, and there weren't too many young ladies in the jazz program, and unfortunately, we dealt with a lot of sexism and sexual bias and discrimination, which was kind of hard to deal with, especially if you're in a situation where you're shy, you're young, and you don't know how to handle it. And unfortunately for us, we didn't have the support to have that intervention of not allowing that to continue. So my last 2 years of high school, um, we had a really hard time, to the point where even just the play was a fight. And by the time I graduated high school, I kind of was done with music, actually, just because my spirit was just done with dealing with it. And I ended up doing really well in earth science. We had a regents every year. At the end of the year, it was a test on science, math, and whatnot, and I did really well on it. And I just thought, you know what, maybe I should try something different. I spent the last 4 years busting my butt and really trying to play and then dealing with all these other different things. I just want to do something that is free, because right now I'm not feeling free. And I did really well in my first semester in college. And after that, I was like, okay, I think I might want to major in this. And I went away to Binghamton University to major in geological and environmental science. But the funny irony is, when I went there, the majority of my professors in my department were musicians. So the geophysics teacher was a French horn player. The earth history, no, actually bio, I think it was earth history and biology, geology teacher. He was a rocker who played organ. And of course, we had guitarists and we had all kinds of musicians in the department. And when they found out that I was a musician, they were just like, "Oh, welcome to the family." But it wasn't until I met Michael Carbone, who was the jazz director of the jazz band up there. He heard that I was there on campus, and he kind of pulled me into the program and got me back on my feet playing again.
So then after college, you moved back to New York, and can you talk a little bit about what your sort of your entry into the jazz scene here, your first project prior to Chesky?
Sure. Well, when I decided to come to New York, it was a decision that wasn't, I guess, a happy decision with my parents, because when I told them that I wanted to be a musician, of course, they were mortified, being both of them being educators. And it was with the encouragement of Michael Carbone and Tia Fuller that they told me that I should pursue music. And I wasn't even thinking about it because I never saw women instrumentalists that, one, looked like me, two, that sounded amazing, and three, see it in person like they exist. And Tia Fuller came as a guest artist one semester, and she literally pulled me aside from rehearsal. I'll never forget. She was just like, "What are you doing here?" And I was just like, "Oh, I'm studying rocks. I'm studying earth science. I'm gonna be, probably doing research or be a, teacher." And she told me, she was like, "Listen, you could actually have a career in this, a great career in this, because you can play. You're talented." And of course, I was kind of like, "Well, I don't know if I could do it. I've never seen anybody." And she literally looked at me in my eyes and was like, "I'm doing it. So if it exists and it's possible," and then a light bulb just kind of went off in my head. And I knew that I was passionate about music, but that kind of made me want to take that leap of faith and do it again. And I graduated, gave my degree to my parents, and the first thing I did was hit up, it was Tia Fuller and a couple of other musicians that I had crossed paths with while I was in college. And Tia at the time was on the road with Beyonce, and she was like, "Listen, I'm not home, but I have another great musician that's like a great big sister. I think you'll work well with." And she introduced me to Mimi Jones, and I literally hit the scene and apprenticed, going to different rehearsals, going to different performances. I worked with Mimi Jones. I ended up working with the late, great Charlie Persip, who we just lost last week, Valery Ponomarev. And that was my introduction to the New York scene. It wasn't about what school did you go to, or what bands did you, have experience playing in school. It was about, listen, if you're ready to play, pull out your horn and see if you can hang. And that was my first 4 or 5 years on the scene, just pedal to the metal, grinding, playing with as many people as I could. Also on my own, writing music, and of course, putting together my own projects in the mix of juggling everything else and being acclimated with New York City freelance living. And it was one of the best learning experiences I ever had, because it was real. And if you wanted to survive, if you wanted to thrive and do well, you had to put the time in. You would show up at a gig or at a session. If you didn't know the tune, you definitely didn't want to go on stage. But your butt would be going home to practice that night so that tomorrow night you can come back and play. So it was like my real education in music. And fortunately, thank goodness, I was able to really hone my craft and work with a lot of incredible artists that ended up hiring me back again or recommending me to other musicians. And I ended up crossing paths with people like Nicholas Payton, Terry Lynn Carrington, um, Robbie Coltrane, Antoine Roney, and so many others who opened up this musical family for me to come into and play, and gave me a chance to just play. And eventually that led up to working with Chesky and Marcellus and Diane Reeves and so many other great artists.
I think the first place that I saw you in concert was at Dizzy's, which I feel like has had a long relationship with you over the years.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, it's funny because I remember I was hanging out with my mentor. She was performing there, and I was at the time just hanging around to see how this lifestyle works, how is performing and managing your concerts and dealing with people. And I remember standing in front of that building one night and just looking up and saying, "I'm going to perform here." And sure enough, within a matter of 5 to 6, not even five, about 5 years later, I ended up performing there with my band, and a couple of times actually, which has been an honor.
So then we approach you about doing a project with us, the first of which was the live project from Rockwood Music Hall, which is Inside the Moment. Do you want to talk a little bit about the unique element of doing a live recording with an audience, but then also combining that with the Chesky element of just one microphone for the entire album?
Yeah, sure. Well, it was an interesting experience because the band and I, we didn't get to play together literally until the day of the performance. And we had some tunes. We had a chance to kind of run through some sketches of some arrangements and whatnot the night before. But we literally just showed up, set up, and just hit. And it was cool having the audience there because it kind of gave us some energy to feed off of. And performing in front of the binaural microphone was kind of interesting because the space at Rockwood is very tight and the ceiling is low. But it's good because it creates a sound environment where what you hear is what you get. It's very precise. And the binaural microphone is placed in front of you. So it was as if I was literally singing in front of somebody the whole time or performing in front of them. But of course, we have to position ourselves so that we could have the right balance of sound feeding into the microphone. And it was very intimate. When I listen back now, I hear everything. I can hear, it's as if I could hear and feel the space of how we were arranged in that room and how close we were. And it was a fun experience. It was very fun. It was live. So whatever came out was what it was. There was no edits, no fixes, no nothing. And it was fun.
I remember there being a particularly troublesome audience member in a couple of instances. Where it'd be like, I can make out like that person's conversation, like, but it's a live
Yeah.
audience. What are you gonna do? And
What are you
it's
gonna
like you said, it's a small room. It's not like it's in a stadium tour where you can't, the one person talking doesn't make a difference.
Right. So everything you hear in that room is gonna appear on that record.
And then, so Cherokee, you
hmm
hadn't even prepared, which you ended up getting an Independent Music Award nomination
Yeah.
for Jazz Vocal Song. You hadn't even prepared prior to the second set, right? That was something that you and David talked about doing in between sets.
Actually, it wasn't even on the schedule, or it wasn't even on the set list. We kind of threw that in at the last minute. David, he wanted to just throw in, something different. We had a bunch of instrumental tunes, and he asked to do, vocal tune, and that's one of my favorite songs that was covered by the great Sarah Vaughan, and she's one of my biggest influences when it comes to singing. So we kind of just made it happen on the spot. It's a tune that everybody knows, and we just kind of said, okay, Ben, you and I up front, band comes in at the bridge, me and you, Ben, again, and then we hit right after that and see you on the other side. And that's exactly what happened. But it's funny you say that because I forgot that tune was off the fly, and little did we know that tune would get us an Independent Music Award.
Well, from what I recall, the project was initially intended to be a lot like predominantly instrumental.
hmm
And then once we started sort of flirting with the vocals being on there, I think David fell in love with your voice and was like, okay, we need to find some ways to get more vocals on here.
Yeah.
What are the guys and the lady, obviously, what do they know that we can sort of immediately turn around without having to rehearse in between sets? So
What did they? I'm sorry. What was that?
it was like, what do they know that we can sort of immediately turn around in between sets without them having to worry about bumbling it up in front of a live audience?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that was pure improvisation happening right on the spot. Figuring it out, knowing exactly what we were working with loosely, and just making it happen.
What's also been cool to see since that session is I believe that the core band, so is that Ben Allison, Mark Whitfield, and Billy Drummond have played a number of shows together since then. So it's almost like that's become a little trio also.
Yeah, that was pretty cool too. Just kind of knowing them individual. Well, for me, that was the first time I got to meet Ben. I heard a lot about him, but then also to play in that combination with those three players, it was such a treat because I heard of each of them. I knew of their music, and I knew who they were as artists, but also musically who they were, and it was just kind of fun making that all come together.
So with the next project, it becomes slightly different, and then there's no live audience, but everything that Chesky does has a degree of live minimalist feel to it. So you actually get to record what we would call a studio record,
Right.
though we even though we do it in a church with one microphone in a day. The next project is a studio record. Talk a little bit about that project, that process, because it is slightly different.
Yeah, well, it's definitely a different process. For that one, we definitely didn't rehearse. We just came together. I had a loose outline of what I had envisioned as far as the arrangements, but I put everything together just so that everybody could bring their individuality and their uniqueness to the music. Because the last thing you want to do when you're trying to put together an album and you're playing with people that never played in that combination before, you don't want to get into the you don't want to get in the way of the artistic space of it having the chance to breathe or become something, a blossom. So we we made sure that we had everything kind of worked out, where we're going to start, how we're going to finish, and then the tunes that I picked were specifically um, pieces that I just fell in love with over the years. And we wanted this project to be kind of like my own little tribute to the singers that inspired me. Of course, Sarah Vaughan, Shirley Horn, and then throwing some other pieces in there that aren't necessarily jazz standards, but can cross over, like an Angela Bofield's "I'm on Your Side," and make it in a jazz context. I wanted to make sure that there were pieces that were interesting, but also fun to listen to. Music that kind of had a lightness to it, but also be enjoyable. And the musicians that were on that record, it was like a dream to be able to work with everybody. They all played with all of my idols that I grew up listening to. Jack Wilkins, he played with Sarah Vaughan. You had Cecil McBee. You had Steve Williams, who played with Shirley Horn. Then you had Jeremy Pelt on there. And then, of course, you had, trying not to forget anybody. I think I named everybody, yeah. But we had such a great unit of musicians that have that experience, and they were so well seasoned. For me, it was a treat because it was like being able to walk in musically into their space that they shared with my heroes and make some magic happen, which we sure did.
And what's been cool for me to see, sort of from, obviously I haven't seen your whole journey, but from when the first time I saw your show to now, the number of lists as far as people to pay attention to that you've appeared on, the number of award nominations and wins, because you ended up winning the Independent Music Award for Jazz Vocal Album for Waiting for the Sunrise, which is the second album that we've been talking about. And then I can't even count all the number of artists to watch lists that you've been on. What's it sort of been like to see all of that work and the hours spent being validated with those sorts of steps and awards?
It's humbling. Honestly, it's very humbling because I just remember myself hitting the scene and just wanting to make music and to play and to grow and to learn and to be able to play with my heroes. And now looking back, almost, yeah, I guess it's been 9 years, looking back and seeing, wow, I've played with the majority of the people that I wanted to play with, and they're projects that I'm really excited and passionate about, that I feel connected to. It's it's a huge honor. It's really huge. And then, of course, to be able to release your own music and work with those heroes is the icing on the cake.
Okay, so where does Wynton Marsalis come into the story?
Well, the last 2 years, I've been touring and performing and recording with the Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra, which has been an incredible experience. Of course, I perform with my own ensemble, Camille Thurman Quartet, and also Camille Thurman with the Darrell Green Trio. And when I got the call to work with the orchestra, it's funny because I was actually on tour with my band in Africa. We were doing a State Department tour sponsored by American Music Abroad. And I got this call at 3 in the morning in, I believe it was Nigeria. And it was Walter Bland, and he called me. He's like, "Hey, I got something I want to throw at you." And I'm looking at the phone like, Walter has my number. And I was like, okay. And he was like, "Yeah, how would you feel if you played with the orchestra for a year?" And I remember sitting there in like shock because I was like, okay, I'm literally on tour right now with my band. If I say yes, I gotta figure this out because I have all these things on the calendar and I don't want to bail, but at the same time, this is an incredible opportunity that I definitely am going to say yes to. I just got to figure out and make it work. And I talked to him and I was like, well, can I have a day just to figure some things out? And he was like, yeah, sure, take your time. And I called on my mentors, four of them that night, including my mom, and they all said, you better take this opportunity because this is this is something that's exciting, but this is also something that's going to be rewarding, not just to you as a saxophonist, but to you as a musician, period. Because you're getting to learn with one of the greatest jazz orchestras in the world, and you're sitting in the front seat, understanding how everything is put together. So it's going to give you a whole nother perspective from what you've been working with with your own ensemble and with other smaller ensembles. And they were right. The impact was huge, not just as a musician, but also as a woman, but also as an educator. I've had the privilege of meeting so many young artists that are excited about this music, and also have been blessed to be in a position where I can pass the torch and talk to other young artists, particularly young women artists who are figuring it out and who were in my position 15, 20 years ago, trying to start their journey. So it's been amazing. I mean, we've recorded several albums. That one year ended up being 2 years, and we've toured all over the world, released some great music. In fact, we just released an album a week ago entitled The Ever Funky Lowdown, where I was a featured guest artist, but then we also did um, another album in tribute to Kansas State University Basketball All-Stars, where I got to play saxophone with the orchestra. And there's so many other great projects I've just been blessed to be able to work with him. And Wynton is just, he's a phenomenal individual. I mean, just as a musician, but as a person too. It's been an honor working with him in the band.
Oh, and I've realized too that in my introduction of you, I forgot to mention you are. I guess I should call you Professor Thurman.
Yes, I am.
So can you talk a little bit about your being a professor at this point?
Sure. But it's funny, COVID has turned so many musicians' worlds upside down. Well, just people in general. But for us musicians, it's literally have been a state of standstill for the last 6 months, and not being able to perform. It's kind of interesting because that's what we do, and not being able to share our music with the world. Sometimes it could be very frustrating, and at times it could be very heartbreaking. And at the same time, you're trying to figure out, well, what do I do now with this newly found space of ample time? And sitting at home for the longest period of my life because I'm always usually home for a day or two and gone. So this opportunity came out of the blue, and it was a position for teaching jazz saxophone at the University of Northern Colorado. And I thought, you know what? We're not going to be performing for a while. I love teaching. I'm an educator. Why don't I take a shot and see what this is about? And sure enough, it worked and it happened. And I'm teaching now jazz saxophone at the University of Northern Colorado.
So you're doing that remote?
Yes, I'm doing this remote.
Have you had any? Is it like individual lessons or is it as a group?
Both. I do individual lessons, but then I also teach some courses too. Right now, I'm teaching jazz improv, which has been fun.
How's that been doing that remote via Zoom?
Um, you know, we it's a process because normally when we're in person, we get to be able to see how things work, and then you're able to directly show your students concepts or how to do certain things with the horn or whatever techniques you're trying to show them. But virtually, we have to kind of think out the box because we're not there in person. So, well, it's a lot of preparation. You got to know exactly what you're trying to teach so you can have the materials accessible to show them. But then also, you have to be very organized. And for me, I had 19 students when I signed up. So it was just kind of like, okay, I got all these great, wonderful students, but I got to get to know them. And the only way I could get to know them is through video. So we've been corresponding, and it's kind of good because it's creating an opportunity for us to create a relationship, a student teacher relationship, so that I'm able to be aware of who they are and where they are in their development, but at the same time, give them what they need. And within this space of being far away, we're able to check on each other as far as how the progress is going. And I'm able to give them the tools that they need to be able to grow. And it's been kind of a good process. And in a weird way, at first it's like, oh, this is going to be a nightmare because you're not going to be able to be in the same room. But in a weird way, it's kind of brought us all together as a community.
Have you tried doing any of like the online shows or sort of the direct to fan one-on-one types of things that people have been doing?
Yeah, I've been actually doing a couple of things. I've done a few live stream shows. I don't do them all the time because, well, one, I strongly feel that you should put something out there of value and of, something that you took the time to put together and craft so that people could really appreciate it. So I've been doing a few concerts here and there, not every week, because I mean we're all dealing with COVID and we all have life we're dealing with. But I've been putting out a few concerts here and there. We just did one for the Hyde Park Jazz Festival. I'm about to do one in October for the True Blues Jazz Festival, and there's one in February that we're doing for the Lionel Hampton Jazz Festival. But I've also been doing other things aside from performance related activities. I've been hosting a bi-monthly series called The Haven Hang, which is a virtual platform I started for young women musicians to talk to women artists who are more established in their careers and ask them questions and get advice on the journey of becoming a musician, but also being a woman too, and all those little things that we have to figure out in the journey because you might not see the role models or mentors, but this is a space where we can bring them together and give them that support. And I've also been doing another virtual series with Jazz at Lincoln Center called Freedom State of Mind, where guest artists come on and they talk about their perspectives on freedom as an artist and, of course, as a member of the community and how they see music as a way of speaking out against social injustices in our community.
And how have you been dealing, just with everyday life? Or do you get out much? Are you hunkering down, stuck inside?
For the most part, I'm hunkering down, but with teaching online, it's a large part of your day is being indoors and being on Zoom and teaching. But when I'm not teaching, I'm definitely going out to get some air, see nature, go for some walks, go for a great bike ride. I've been really enjoying that because most of the time we're on the road all the time and we might not have the luxury of being able to take advantage of what's around us. Like we can go to a city and we might maybe fly in, have an hour, change our clothes, go to the concert. Next morning, we're out to the next city. But since we're home now, we actually have the space and the time to appreciate those things that we don't normally get to experience every day.
Yeah, I found it pretty much just get outside to go for a run a couple times a week, and
Yeah,
then otherwise I'm inside.
yeah.
Yeah, it can be a little constricting.
It can be, but it's also on a bright side been a great chance to get to know the community you live in. I mean, I know for me as a musician, most of my time is on the road, which is wonderful. You get to meet and see other cultures and experience the world. But then if you're not really home, you don't really get to know what's happening on your block. So it's been kind of refreshing to be able to wake up and go on a trail and ride the bike or walk to the river and just enjoy nature and say hi to your neighbor every now and then. Share um, some fresh things from the garden. Get some tomatoes, get some cucumbers and whatnot, and enjoy just life.
What would you say have been some of either your most or some of your most rewarding experiences so far?
Oh man, my that's a hard question because there's been so many. I'm really grateful for. Um, I'll never forget. I was in Cameroon, Africa, and we were on the State Department tour, and we did this concert, and it was in a community center. And normally, as musicians, we perform in concert halls and all kinds of wonderful music venues. But this was just simply a community center, and people brought their chairs from their homes to the center and lined up and sat down. And it was one of the best concerts I remember ever having because the people were so excited about this music that they didn't care how they looked or how they sounded. They were just in it and enjoying it with us. So much so that a few guys ran on stage and started dancing while we were playing. And it caught me off guard because I'm playing, and then I look and somebody's moving and that's the arms. And I'm like, oh shoot, he's dancing. And it was just so exhilarating just seeing that, seeing how the music was so enjoyable to them and how they were appreciating it and reacting to it. And it made us react back in a way where we wanted to keep playing, keep that energy going. And it was such a beautiful exchange. And I appreciated and loved how they didn't care. They were just having a great time. And the music was just that powerful to make them just get up and move and enjoy themselves. And I think that's the thing as musicians, we always have to remember when we're performing or even if we're recording, the music that we put out, it's something that people are able to partake in and enjoy and experience. And you always want that to be the main focal point of what you do. So, yeah.
I think the most enduring sort of image in my head I have from you is you spinning in a circle at the BET Music Awards red carpet.
Yeah, that was a good one too.
I think the video was just on loop, so it was just like you smiling and going.
And my arms are just like, this is it. Oh, that was a surprise though. Like I remember when you emailed me and you're like, "Hey, you got nominated for an award for the NAACP Image Awards." And I was like, "Is this a scam?" You're like, "No, this is real. You want to go to California?" Yeah. No, that was a good surprise. That was an experience because you grow up watching that award show and then to get an invitation to attend and find out that your music is being recognized for being a great work, and in the people in that category too, it was an honor. It was really rewarding because it's just like, wow, we did something great and other people like it.
So, talk to me about Stephen Colbert.
Ah. That's funny because I met John I met John Batiste at Jazz at Lincoln Center's gala a couple of years ago, and we knew of each other, but we didn't know each other personally. And I guess he was following my career, and I was following his career, and him and Winton have a great relationship. And we bumped into each other backstage one day at a concert, and he was like, "Man, I love you," and I was like, "Man, I love you," and he was like, "We gotta play together," and I was like, "I would love to play with you." And the next month, I got a call, and it was one of the producers from the Steve Colbert Show, and they were like, "Hey, John Batiste uh, told me to give you a call. We're having a taping of a show. We would love to have you come join the band as a guest." And I was like, "Yeah." And thank goodness I was home at the time because our schedules, especially with the orchestra, you're all over the place, and you maybe might have 3 4 days of time within the month, or if you're lucky, maybe a week or week and a half where you're home. And the timing was perfect because I was literally home that week, and I did the taping with them. And it's funny because that particular taping, Kamala Harris was a special guest, And this is way before we even knew that she was going to be, you know, vice president elect for the Democrats. And I was just kind of like, oh, this is cool. And John, he was like, you know what, let's play George Clinton's One Nation Under a Groove. And I was like, okay. He's like, well, I want you to sing, and I want you to scat. And I'm sitting there with my horn, like, okay. And in that kind of environment, everything is just like, go, 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 go. You're putting music together on the fly, so you always got to be prepared to be able to just jump in and just go for the ride. And I never forget, we did the taping, and he counted it off, and he was like, you got it. And I just started singing, and I just started scatting, and I remember her kind of turning around and looking kind of like, yeah. And that was her entrance into the show. But working with John Batiste and Steve Colbert, it was so much fun. We ended up coming back and doing another one with Jim Carrey as the guest, and we ended up doing like a New Orleans front line, marching all over through the audience, which was fun. Yeah, it was incredible.
So obviously none of us, know the future, but what do you think is next for you in the coming months?
For me in the coming months, well, trying to keep that creative energy going and moving forward. Um, right now, I'm spending part of my time as an educator, teaching the next generation of young artists. But then also, I'm spending my time honing my craft, always looking for new pieces to explore and rearrange, or music to write, or inspiration to write pieces. And I'm also always trying to put projects together. We're trying to finish up a couple of projects. I'm hoping that we can get things up and running, and release them out next year. We had a few things planned for 2021, and because of COVID, some of those things got nixed, but we're not going to let that stop us. We're still hoping to make those projects happen. And of course, you can stay tuned by going to my website, www.camillethurmanmusic.com, to find out what projects will be releasing soon, and all the great stuff that's going to be happening.
All right, Camille, thanks for joining us and enjoy your trip in San Francisco.
Thank you for having me. Good to see you.
You too.